Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to video game news. Today is what day? Wednesday, January 7th. It's starting a little later. I'm in the middle of what I would describe as a crash. In fact, pretty much the entire warm-up can be shortened down to I had planned on doing several things yesterday and I was just like really tired and really just slept for most of yesterday, which kind of sucks because I'm really on the verge of making some real progress on cleaning and decluttering, but one of the processes here is building or reassembling a computer desk, and that's more physical work than I'm usually used to. I'm almost completely done with Vampire Survivors. There's a lot of secrets in Vampire Survivors that are too secret. Like, there's no way you'd ever figure out how to unlock these secrets without going online and looking up a walkthrough. For a modern game, that is really a mistake. We're scrolling down the Steam DB 24-hour peak concurrent player count chart. But yeah, I would have much preferred that they had dropped all of the secrets to unlock new characters and just had one or two more levels that maybe had some more variety to them. A lot of the characters, there's too many characters before you even get into DLC that adds more characters, I'm sure, already, and the characters just aren't particularly that different. And I still need to look to make sure that there aren't still some other stuff to unlock. Plus, then they add the adventure mode, and the adventure mode is just this weird side quest that is dragging out how long you would play Vampire Survivors. Which, yeah, Vampire Survivors is definitely not better than Binding of Isaac. And Binding of Isaac, I think, is still just like several steps above most. Well, no, I think pretty much every other game. I can't think of a game better than Binding of Isaac in its game flow, in its experience. Yeah, whereas if I was to get more DLC for Vampire Survivors right now, I'd just be burnt out on Vampire Survivors. But yeah, that is pretty much the entire warm-up here. I've been spending a lot of time just reacclimating myself to the state of 3D printing and getting sort of interested in that. That certainly could be a large time suck. But also, I would say looking at like videos at the beginning of 2026 is not too different from looking at videos at the beginning of 2025. Like, there is a plateau as far as people figuring out things to make with 3D prints. I did look into how to potentially get rid of layer lines, and I was trying to see if maybe coating it with epoxy helps, and yes, but then you still pretty much are spray painting it after that with a paint, a primer paint, and then there's just a lot of painting and sanding and stuff that you would have to do with epoxy and then gloss over the paint to get a nice glossy look. In particular, the video I was watching was somebody who was making a Pokeball, which has that bright red glossy look to it. But yeah, the truth of it may very well be that if you wanted something relatively small that looks really good, you might be more technically inclined and make a 3D print that's like 2 to maybe even 10 times bigger, and then you might use a device that it's kind of an ancient device, and it's one of the many tricks I think ancient artists had in their abilities and in their toolbox that just doesn't really get talked about. But yeah, there's a device that is for making like coins in particular, where you have a very big mold of the coin, and then you trace this 10 times bigger, or some scale, some ratio bigger mold, and it makes a much smaller coin from that to be what you actually use. And so I could see taking something like that and having layered lines on it, and then finding a way to modify a tool like that. I forget the name of it. It's kind of obscure. And then it would be able to scale things down, smooth things out. Yeah. Figurines in particular, I think, might work very well there. But then you're going to really get, if you were doing figurines, into the area of just painting. Like, and it is a lot of Warhammer potential painting stuff that I definitely would not really get into. So, yeah. There's a little bit of excitement there, but then there's, I think, also some practicality there. It also seems like in 2026 that 3D prints these days often are paid models, which I guess that's the only way that it would continue to be a thing, is that people who actually make models are going to start charging money for them. So it potentially goes from being a relatively cheap hobby once you are set up to being a much more expensive hobby if you're paying potentially $50 to $100 for every model that you may only print once. And I would have thought that there was a lot more little kids' toys and things you could give to people out there, but I really haven't seen a lot of things like that. But I haven't really just gone to Thingiverse, which apparently is not even the main site that's used anymore, and searched. And in general, like any search, you have to kind of have a general idea of what you're looking for. So yeah, I've been doing a little bit of that too. Might even be doing a little bit more Pokemon TCG Pocket and Memento Mori even every now and then, trying to make a little bit more progress there. Uninstalling Madoka Magica, Magi, etc. was definitely the right move. I have not regretted it. There's been no twinge to reinstall it, and that has saved several hours, I imagine, already, of things I was wasting time on, which then is probably all been dumped into playing Balatro and Vampire Survivors. I now have potentially 2 games on my Steam Deck that I really can't play if I'm just lying in bed and resting. Of course, I'm still watching just like way too many of the exact same YouTube video podcasts from years and years ago. Radio shows, Shock Chalk radio shows, Opie and Anthony, things like that. Mostly Ron and Fez, still. And I've heard them all before, most of Ron and Fez. And some of them I'm listening to the same video every single day. It's insanity, really. but it creates that nice background noise to just have something on in the background. But it's really not enough. Like, if my eyesight really gets terrible, which it does feel like it's just getting worse and worse, I'm really glad I am going to actually see a eye doctor. I now just hope that the eye doctor actually finds something and doesn't just dismiss me. The last time I did see a doctor, which was a long time ago, they pretty much just dismissed me and weren't interested in actually being helpful. Which, yeah, that's an annoyance, certainly, too. But yeah, if my eyesight really just became so bad that I couldn't play video games, I would very much be beside myself. I would not know what to do with myself. There's just not enough other entertaining things. Like, I am completely tone deaf when it comes to music, so it would be a very difficult journey to try and find music to listen to, or radio or something. And I am old and frankly a little too old to learn anything new, so like learning Braille, reading books in a world where I don't even read books while I can see things would be very annoying. I just had an interesting thought. Yeah, you could probably embose comic books with Braille, but it almost wouldn't make sense to do it. Although, you know, that wouldn't be a terrible service. Like, you would have to basically take every single page, imagine, rip them out of a floppy comic, which would really just be removing the staple in the middle, taking every single page and then add a visual description of what's going on, and then adding Braille text. And that wouldn't be very useful. What would be better is if you, and I figure if you're going to make a service like this, and as a business, would be to have some kind of AI thing, unfortunately, or some kind of automation edge detection thing happen that would emboss the edges of the images, which that would be cool. Like, you have a Batman comic and you run your fingers over each page and you feel the outline of Batman, and so you can see the pose and such, but that would be hard to do because there's not really a good way to do it. It would be probably easier, instead of embossing the page and bending the page, which is what you would normally do, probably be easier to print on top of the page with a thick ink, black ink. So yeah, you can see doing that. You scan the page, you find the edges of the important things, and you then print a thick black ink that you can feel on top of it. And then a lot of thoughts, if you were doing comics for the blind, you would probably not even just include the original comics, but I could see how you could actually want to show or have somebody else describe what they're saying in the comics. So yeah, wonder if someone has thought of that. I also spent extra time and wasted some extra water today trying to clean up an old remote. I have this Vizio remote that has this like rubberized backing on it that's dissolving and turning in oil, and so I was trying to clean it off with acetone, and that probably was the wrong chemical to use, even though it did dissolve a lot of it. I think the acetone is probably not going to get all of the gunk off the back of it, and it is going to very quickly be embedded on the plastic shell around it. So yeah, I imagine the remote might be pretty much ruined, but it was pretty much ruined already. It's for an old TV that's only 720p, and it still works, at least last time I plugged it in, but there is definitely an argument to just tossing it. Because yeah, 720p TV is not worth much, particularly one that's, I think, over 10 years old at this point and is super heavy. It's the weight that's the issue. Increasingly, I'm wanting to get rid of TVs that are just too heavy. Like, the weight is crazy for, I mean, I guess it's nothing as crazy as the old TVs that would have been hundreds of pounds, but yeah, 60, 75 pounds on any TV these days is too heavy for me to personally move alone, and I don't get a lot of people who are willing to help move a TV these days, and most people don't. I messed with my Wi-Fi settings a little bit. There was a Bluetooth coexistence mode setting. Honestly, I don't think it ever really works, but I might as well turn it on into preemptive mode. Basically, it tells Bluetooth devices not to use the same frequencies in preemptive mode. It does this. It tells them to not use the same frequencies as what you're using on your Wi-Fi network, to try and keep things a little bit more separate. So I turned that on, and with some of my smart devices also being Bluetooth connectable, maybe that will help a little bit. I also turned the 2.4 gigahertz channel to just be a 20 megahertz channel, not a 20/40 megahertz channel, because yeah, that pretty much never works anyways. So yeah, while you could get double speed at 40 megahertz or 80 megahertz or even 160 megahertz, if those options are available to you, you would have to be in the middle of a farm or something to not have other devices using those channels and taking up some of that and causing interference, for lack of a better term. The December Steam charts now have been changed in how they appear, because notice everything is now just wrapping around, and that definitely is not my intention as to how this should look. Speaking of Steam, I also want to point out that there were some OLED refurbs available yesterday, so now that would be the best deal. It was like the 512 OLED, I think was like $400. Still a good deal, still probably worth it. I think that there are two likely scenarios that will happen with the Steam machine. One is that they will say because of the RAM shortage and everything else going up, the prices are going to be really high. Ideally, you'd want a Steam machine to be somewhere between $700 and $900. I wouldn't be surprised if it's $1,500 to $2,000 for the Steam machine, which is going to feel too expensive. Or it's really just going to be a paper launch on the Steam machine and there aren't going to be that many units available. I wouldn't be surprised if there's a whole spec'd out thing like other companies do, whereas if you order a machine that is the most expensive, you're going to be put at the priority top of the list, and if you order the cheapest machines, you're going to be put at the bottom of the list. And so people who order the most expensive ones may get it first. That is another thing. I definitely think I'll 3D print is a shell of a Steam machine. I could see putting a little slot in the top of one of those 3D prints and having a little piggy bank, coin bank. I could also see cutting out speaker grills on the front and maybe top and maybe bottom for a subwoofer of the Steam machine shell. That way you could have Steam machine looking speakers that would match the machine in size. Although I don't know anything about the acoustics there. But yeah, I still think you have a known price and you have a known level of performance. Getting a Steam Deck OLED makes a lot of sense. Even if they did come out with a Steam Deck 2, which I don't think they're going to for at least a couple of years, the cost for it is probably going to be pretty high. I was thinking about potentially 3D printing a back shell that would add more a battery to the Steam machine. It doesn't really need, to the Steam Deck, it doesn't really need more battery, and doing it internally would be somewhat dangerous to add more battery that way instead of doing it externally through the USB-C charging plug. Yeah, Steam says I've been playing Vampire Survivors for 161 hours. Definitely starting to feel like that. And we have 201 of 243 achievements. So at this point, just to click on all of the achievements, let's see which ones I haven't earned. So originally there was only 35 achievements. Then there's a 35th anniversary pack, which has definitely not been out for 35 years. So I don't know where that name comes from. There's only 2 achievements there. Then version 2.10 came out after that. And so you can see how they just kept adding items. And so me being late to the party, it does seem like the game has too much in it. Which is the same problem you'd have with Binding of Isaac playing it now, is you're going to have a little more stuff in it than you would expect. Although Binding of Isaac, I think, is very good about slowly feeding you new items, whereas a lot of the new items in Vampire Survivors are not items that you really care about. So yeah, generally I would not play a game until it's at a 1.0 version. So all of that content up until this point would have been what I would have seen normally. And then this content is the stuff that I haven't seen. Okay. And this is DLC content, 17 there. So that might be why I don't have all of the achievements. That might be free DLC though. No, there's one free DLC and then there's some more DLC. And more stuff. So I may very well have all the achievements that I can get. Alright, so it's version 1.11 is complete once the Adventure of Garlic Paradise, which only 3.7% of players have that achievement, which, yeah, that is the next thing really I'm going to work on. And then this is the next thing I'm going to work on. And so you can see these are two adventure modes that people are just not really playing. And so that is the entirety of the achievements that I can get, and everything else is behind DLC. Which that really sucks when you look at a game and realize that the DLC is preventing you from getting 100% achievements, and as such you'll not be highlighting this game on your Steam page. It does look like it's only 2 DLCs that actually add achievements though. I think there's more than 2 DLCs. Yeah. So Steam's front page doesn't really have anything going on. I did reset my Firefox browser. I have no idea why they would implement this auto video play on every single page. Seems like Valve is actively trying to make Steam use up their own servers as much as possible. Now that the sale is over, it is back to highlighting the new and trending first, and this Help I'm Turning Into a Mermaid definitely looks like it's a porn game, or at least a lewd game. And everything else being shown here is kind of pretty much the same old, same old. Steam Deck right now seems to be $449. Is that the regular price? Let's just go ahead and open that link in a new tab. Might just be on sale. It would perhaps make a lot of sense to have your Steam Deck on sale while you are releasing and launching the Steam machine, because then you can just say, hey, the $1,200, $1,500 Steam machine, if that's too expensive for you, we have the Steam Deck at $450. Yeah. Which, yeah, that is possibly what's going on here. Yeah. They're not making this one anymore, and they're saying that the new out of the box 512 gigabyte OLED is $550. Let's just click on the Steam machine from this banner and see what happens. Meanwhile, you could get a 1 terabyte refurb right now for $519, or the 512 refurb if it's in stock for $439. The thing I've seen though is that you have to potentially reload the page to see if you'll get the button that says it's in stock, or even use the phone app instead. Which, yeah, this is another thing I will probably print, is that there's a couple of 3D prints for scale, and a banana for scale is the kind of funny thing to do there. I probably would want to also make a 3D model, but I don't personally want to make any of the 3D models because that's going to be a waste of time to see how you would add these into a rack mount situation. There's undoubtedly a way, but I don't know if there's really great mount points without drilling holes into a steam machine and I don't know if the sizing is going to be great. They give away the 3D prints for them, but the 3D prints also have little images of the connector ports and such, so there would have to be some modification for 3D printing these if you wanted to do something slightly different. And that those files have been out for a while and I haven't seen anybody really do anything special with it. There is still a problem with 3D printing in that you just start something 3D printing and it takes forever, on top of it potentially giving off fumes and making a lot of noise. I am perhaps in a unique situation where the fumes and noise may not be as big of a deal for me as most people. Scroll down and see what people are playing on their Steam Decks. I didn't do any work again. I'm probably in the middle of a crash. I hope it doesn't last too long as far as just being really tired, but I am really anticipating accomplishing very little in at least the next couple of days. Even though I really do need to work on the CSS of things like Video Games Chronicles, it almost doesn't make sense to mess with the CSS too much of Steam if Steam is in the middle of changing things again as far as how their page works. And it would be pretty crazy that they intentionally want all videos to play automatically after Steam just crashed. Yeah. Apparently Valve amended the Steam survey for December. Linux actually hit another all-time high. Interesting. Alright, well, before we jump into the Video Games Chronicle news, I'm going to take a break, so I will be back in a few minutes. Okay, I'm back now. I did look up online, just a quick Google, and yeah, there really isn't a resource. There's one small collective that's trying to make comics for the blind that are accessible, but they're trying to effectively just make it looks like new comics, which, yeah, the idea of retrofitting a process for the blind doesn't seem to be something that comes up at first on a Google search, when yeah, it really could be done as far as just some add-in sheets. One sheet that would be like a stencil overlay where you could feel the outline of the pictures, and then one sheet being just the text. You would just need one of the newer UV resin type printers that gives you height, and that is a relatively new technology, but yeah, just an automated process. The big question there would be, if you were going to make a business like that, do you go to Marvel and DC and give them a chance to get their lawyers to sue you, or do you just do it and hopefully defend yourself under fair use exemptions for accessibility reasons? Because yeah, there definitely is a way you could do that where the additional pages being sold would be in replacement of having to purchase the original comic book, which yeah, would probably be safer if you just demanded resale, which would mean that people cannot bring comics that are older into that format, like a Detective Comics or a Action Comics #1, for instance. You're not going to scan it and then disassemble it and add additional pages, because that would ruin the value of an extremely rare comic at that point. You're probably not going to do as much Spawn or lesser known comics. So yeah, the easiest way to get around that is to buy in bulk. Like, if you got a business like that, you would have all of the new every month floppy issues of all the comics come in, at least one copy. You would do the whole process for at least one comic. It'd be a great excuse for somebody to build up a huge collection of comics, although I don't know if there's a good reason to do that. But yeah, you would have them ready to go, and then you would sell them in bulk. You'd buy them in bulk, and then you would sell the modified versions of them with the comic included. The cheaper way to do that would be to only buy one copy of the comic and then only sell the addendum pages, which for blind people is probably all they would want. But no, I think you'd legally, yeah, you'd immediately have to lawyer up, and that's the problem with most businesses, is you immediately start having to get patents, having to get lawyers, trying to protect yourself when you're doing anything new and innovative. The law will be against you, and every other industry will be against you. Of course, that has nothing to do with video games. My mind is wandering. Let's go through the Video Games Chronicle news now. Again, I didn't fix any of the video visuals here, so it's going to be just the terrible way Video Games Chronicle looks at the moment. Ubisoft has closed its Halifax studio and claims the decision is unrelated to recent unionization. 70 roles are affected by the Assassin's Creed Rebellion studio. The chances that it is completely unrelated to the recent unionization is zero. Really. Either the unionization was happening because they knew the offices were about to close, or they had a feeling the offices were about to close, or the closings happened because unionization occurred. Like, there's no way that was not a consideration. So yeah, New year, same old BS of anti-union sentimentality from management and big companies, and big companies laying off people, which really shows the need for unionization. Yeah. It may very well become a future where only jobs that have strong unions exist, because any job that doesn't have a strong union is going to just be replaced with automation, robotics, and things like that. AI, possibly. Let's see. Splitgate Arena Reloaded devs respond to low player numbers. Steam charts don't measure fun, is their quote there. That is a weird statement to say, but I guess technically true, is that you can't really measure an emotion like fun, but you can get darn close when you are showing that people are not actually playing the game. Unfortunately, there is a nastiness there, in that there are lots of games that aren't particularly that fun, but still people play a lot of them. I think a lot of the bots and players on Counter-Strike 2 are probably just skin farming and aren't really having as much fun as one would like them to be having. After 8 years, Red Dead Redemption 2 is the name of the game. Players are scrambling to solve a newly unearthed mystery. The spiderweb mystery has swept across the Red Dead Redemption community. Okay, like, I don't know that there are that many people playing Red Dead Redemption 2 for this to really be that relevant. This may very well just be a case that there isn't that much video game news today. And I don't expect any major video game news until probably the Steam Machine comes out, which probably won't be until at least the third month of the year. But yeah, we're just not really expecting anything big. There was a new hack exploit, I think, for the PlayStation 5, maybe the PlayStation 4, that may have cracked it. That these things happen, certainly, but I don't know if there really is a good reason why you would crack PlayStation 5 hardware, unless you were just really broke and figured you could download a bunch of torrents of games for free and actually play them. Most of the PlayStation 5 games probably have online elements that you wouldn't be able to play. There's, I guess, a decent amount of single player experiences one could have. More likely, the enthusiasm around this crack is that it might lead to better and possible future emulation, but there is kind of less of a reason to need to emulate a PlayStation 5 game when most of the PlayStation 5 games worth playing are already on PC. And yeah, I imagine going forward, if we do have future generations of consoles, there will be less and less need to actually emulate the consoles to run a game, as much as there will just be Windows versions of those games, at the very least, that can just play. Emulation really is for just increasingly older games. Further evidence to that is this article here. The PlayStation's most played games of 2025 are identical to the 2024 list, which that really goes to, I wish they should show the list, but in a nice format way, but really goes to show just how terrible 2025 was for video games. I mean, it can't get much worse as far as the only thing that worse that could have happened is that Nintendo shut down Microsoft shut down and PlayStation shut down, if just all three of those companies went out of business completely and there were no consoles, then that would be pretty bad for video games. But you'd still have Steam, and the odds of Steam shutting down or PC gaming shutting down in general is pretty low. In fact, I would say with the rising cost of RAM and other parts, we may see a slight slowdown in PC gaming in general, and Windows 10 might slow down PC gaming in general in the next couple of years. But yeah, I said throughout pretty much all of 2025 that it was a terrible year. 2024 wasn't even particularly a good year for games getting released, and I don't really have a lot of confidence that 2026 is going to be much different. Let's see. Neil Druckmann will present a former Naughty Dog partner, Evan Wells, with DICE's biggest award. So there's some kind of award ceremony that's going to happen. And yeah, this guy, former co-president, is going to get a Hall of Fame of award. So I'll leave it at that. And it's kind of pointless and frankly insulting to care about awards given to co-presidents when there are so many actual artistic people who actually create games that barely even get their names in the credits of games, and a lot of people that don't get their names in credits. Until we have an industry-wide standard of including people's names in the credits if they worked for even a second on a game, and not delisting them from credits if they happen to be fired or quit before the game is launched, or just some companies don't even put people's names in the credits at all. Until that changes, the people at the top should not be given any awards at all. And even after that happens, I still don't think that people at the top should be given awards. Rich people patting themselves on the back only feeds into their warped perspective of reality, that they make all the success happen, when in reality they just have money, influence, and friends more often than not. Yeah. Let's see. The Pokemon Center returns to London in February. There's some new exclusive things. This is the kind of stuff you'd like to 3D print and sell, but you'll very quickly get a cease and desist from the Pokemon company if you wanted to do that. Fan art and small projects and Etsy things like that just don't really work. People get away with selling those things on Etsy for a short time, but yeah, it has to be kind of a wholly newly created thing. And if it is a wholly new created thing, it has to somehow find some popularity. So if you are a game developer, or you knew somebody that was a game developer, then making something from their characters in their game and putting it on Etsy is probably the closest thing that you could do. American McGee has his wife run a company that in China that makes a plushie dreadfuls, and those plushies they promote like crazy, and a lot of those sales are from the fact that American McGee promotes them and pushes them, which yeah, that's pretty much all he does on his YouTube channel. When he does pop up something is a short commercial for the plushie dreadfuls. Moving on, Xbox Game Pass has dropped 2 surprise releases for January. With an update here, even more games announced, including Star Wars Outlaws. So, Adamfall, Lost in Random, Rematch, Warhammer 40k Space Marine, Master Crafted Edition, Final Fantasy, I guess that's one. Star Wars Outlaws, My Little Pony, Resident Evil Village, and Memories in Orbit. MIS, Memories in Orbit. Or MIO, MIO, Memories in Orbit, I bet. Yeah. I definitely think I need to turn up the DPI and the text scaling. CES is going on right now. So far, I haven't seen anything particularly too realistic and exciting. There's some push for robots that would do dishes or cook for you. Weirdly, none of these robots that look like humanoids and that have human hands and could do things, none of them are doing things that you really would like them to do. Like, the number one thing I'd like a robot like that to be able to do is just clean the toilets. Just do that. Scrub the bathtub. Fold clothing. Do laundry. Dust around the house. Leave the cooking, which I find can be fun to me, and the dishes is really a simplistic process, because what they always show when they show a robot doing the dishes is them scraping the plate a little bit and then putting it in a dishwasher. So there's already a machine that does the majority of that work. And if I'm going to have a humanoid robot, the number one thing I'd like it to do is be able to pick me off the ground if I fall and break a leg or something. I've never seen them even begin to address the thought that this guy could potentially help lift you up, or that it could carry groceries in, or that it could move furniture. Like, there's all kinds of things the robots could do that they're just not really targeting. And the robots they're showing are also just ridiculously vaporware. They're not going to really happen. We may get some more book style fold phones where they unfold to be big enough to the size of a small book. But I think overall we're going to see nothing really that new. AMD revealed a 9850 X3D, which is slightly more powerful than the 9800 X3D. And then that is pretty much it as far as new NVIDIA and AMD stuff worth talking about. Kojima Productions revealed a gaming tablet collab where it's just branding on top of a standard Asus gaming tablet. One of the TVs with micro LEDs has gone back to the old style of how the red, green, and blue pixels were lined up in columns next to each other, where there was, for most of the micro LEDs, more of a red and blue are in two columns, and then below the red, green, and blue was below the red and blue was a green that was twice as long, I believe is how it was set up. Which, yeah, Windows and TrueType fonts are not used to that layout, and so readability on computer monitors in particular was suffering because of that layout just being non-standard. So yeah, they're going back to the old column standard, I think, is probably the right move. Let's see. Apparently Resident Evil Requiem's NVIDIA trailer includes a big tease at a new environment. Seems to be showing some kind of, feels like maybe Chicago location. I don't even want to really watch it here. Let's see. We'll just go full screen here and see what this is. This very well may be the move once again to take Resident Evil and try and make it feel more realistic. No longer is it going to be a Raccoon City type location with a silly name, although I'm not sure how much we ever really solve Raccoon City. The first Resident Evil obviously was just in a mansion, so that was fairly realistic. It's really only until you get to like Resident Evil 4 do you start to have a really silly Spanish locations, yeah, and Spanish castles and things like that. And then Resident Evil 5 I thought probably was pretty crazy locations too. So it does kind of hint back to trying to be a little bit more horror centric with these more realistic looking locations. Let's see. Sony's upcoming Ophelia 1 car will let you drive with Astrobot or God of War. This is the car that integrated a PlayStation into it. Not much of a good reason to buy what is probably going to be a overly expensive, overly designed Honda car. A Sony AI patent will see PlayStation games play themselves when the players are stuck. The AI-generated Ghost Player Assistant would help out players who can't progress in the game. Again, this is a great example of people making patents when really there should be more openness to people taking ideas and running with them. I don't think there's too much of this that really is going to ever be implemented, and it is a sad statement that this may just be hinting at that they know fewer and fewer people have friends watching them play games, or have friends that would come over and help them beat a part of games, or have siblings that would help them beat parts of the games. But yeah, the socialization aspect amongst kids these days seems to be decreasing severely. Yeah. Yeah, hopefully it doesn't decrease too much, but it does kind of seem like it is. What's funny is I personally always kind of felt I was a awkward kind of antisocial person and when I was a kid, and I think most people probably were more awkward and antisocial. Almost everyone was when they were a kid, and I still kind of consider myself slightly awkward and antisocial, but I'm afraid I might become considered quite normal compared to the next generation. Of course, that is perhaps just an old person's way of thinking, and the kids are probably alright, but I do think kids probably need to be encouraged to socialize more than they were to. And even when I was a kid, I needed and did not get enough encouragement to socialize more. Playdates were not really made when I was young. I wasn't told to go hang out with people or go hang out at the mall enough, or hang out with kids. Which, yeah, most parents don't let their kids date or encourage them to date in any way, so they go from an abrupt no sex before marriage mentality, which includes no dating at all for some kids to we expect you to get married now that you're in college and have babies as soon as possible, which lots of people fall into that trap where they haven't dated many people, they haven't played the field, they don't know how to really relate to people, so they get married. And the second they get married, they start having unprotected sex like crazy and get pregnant, and so they don't even enjoy that honeymoon period before they are already into the child raising period. Then they didn't really want the child at that point and don't really like the child that much, and so they tend to be pretty crappy, if not abusive parents. And so, yeah, a lot of problems could really be solved if people just played the field a little bit more and dated and figured out what they have to change about themselves to be an acceptable human being to other human beings, and what an acceptable human being to other beings is in general. Moving on to video game news from Gamatsu, since I'm kind of rambling. Touhou Blossom Blade launches January 22nd for Switch and PC. It is apparently a Switch Touhou game. Still tons of Touhou fan games and Touhou projects things. But yeah, suppose you could probably make 3D prints off the characters in Touhou, considering there seems to be a lot of freedom in the licensing on that. But let's also face it, you're not going to make a viable, this is your only job business until you're potentially running an entire print farm with many printers. Even then, you probably aren't making huge business around it. Yeah. So that's Touhou Blossom Blade. Don't really have too much to say there. Moving on. A pixel art high-speed kunai action platformer Inari has been announced for PC. Kunai is the Japanese word, I think, for female ninjas, as it were. And yeah, since there were no female ninjas, yep. So you have a cat girl anime character in this animation. And then it jumps into what the rest of the actual game experience is going to look like. Yeah, with every new year I wonder if I can play these more fast-paced games. I like when I can play these kinds of games, and it is something I can control and take a good experience from, but it is the case that there are a lot of these that are fast-paced and difficult, and it's the and difficult part that does not ever work well for me. So we'll zoom back up to 120 on the scale there. There's Blossom Blade. Also, let's see. Umami Grove for PSVR 2 launches January 27th. It's currently available for Steam VR and Quest. It's a virtual reality cooking game. I don't know if I really want to sit through the trailer of this. Well, so far I haven't seen anything that shows actual cooking. Interesting, you're cooking for these little creatures. But it is a VR game too, so it's not really gonna be something I could ever play. Parasite Mutant demo for PC is now available. Okay. This is a game that hasn't come out yet. And it is a game I have missed any other news from, if there was other news from it. It feels like it is inspired in part by Parasite Eve. But how many? Just because it has Parasite in the name doesn't mean anything. Code Vein 2 in the Japanese translation is going to stop using the phrase Rinvents. Renevents, whatever that R word is, I can't pronounce it. Which is interesting because they're keeping the phrase in all the other localizations, particularly English. So I assume that they're just going to be calling them vampires or something in Japanese otherwise. But yeah, that certainly is one of those things that can irritate people if you are not consistent across your localization with what is being called now. Wizard 101 for Switch launches January 13th. It's a Magic School MMORPG. It looks like it would be a card game, but it's not labeled that way. Yeah. It does have card game elements, but does, I think, fall much closer under the category of an MMORPG. You can see on Steam it is rated very positively and has been around since 2008, so not apparently a lot of people online right now. 419. That's another example of it not wrapping around. Let's see. Muchi O for PC launches January 19th. Doomsday Land defense adventure game is what it's described as. Let's watch this in full screen. Honestly, I think going full screen may be the way to go always. So it's a little hamster character that then spits out missiles. I mean, that certainly is a twist, I suppose, as far as taking what would otherwise be a fairly simplistic shooter game, single screen shooter game, and putting some kind of cutesy thing to it. Although you could also argue that maybe it's a little jaded and that they are just trying to have a cute mascot character in their simplistic game, which simplistic definitely seems to be what this is mostly going to be. Feels like it might even be more of an idle game. It's tagged as a tower defense game. Yeah, and apparently I saw this in June 1st and paid no attention to it at all. I can see why. Game Pass adds Star Wars Outlaws, Resident Evil Village, and more in January. Let's see the full list here on Gematsu. The Liar Prince and the Blind Prince is coming to PC in early 2026. That game hasn't been on PC? I mean, that came out many years ago, I guess, for the PlayStation, if I was to guess. PS4, Switch, and PS Vita in 2018 in Japan, followed by 2019 worldwide. So, I mean, you're talking 10 years. It feels like, 7 years. That is a long, long time. And it definitely feels like the only reason they're bringing it to PC is because they wanted to make some more money on it, or they didn't have anything else they could make money on. Otherwise, I don't think they would have bothered. That might be a more Japanese thing, NIS America being stubborn. Speedball launches January 27th for the PS5, Xbox Series, and PC, currently in early access. Which, yeah. With sports themselves, I think, kind of dying in the real world, it's hard to believe that fantasy sci-fi versions of sports and video games are going to become way more popular. Romeo is a Dead Man story, quote-unquote, trailer is available. We'll want to watch that because we know that's going to be wild and crazy. Yeah. All the subtitles are at the bottom of the screen and probably getting cropped off. I keep forgetting that things are getting cropped, and I don't know really why that's happening. But there's a Romeo, there's a Juliet character, and then there's a lot of subtitle text happening here. I am not hearing any of the audio myself, weirdly. So the page, I think, is probably muted. Yeah. A lot of this is, I think, just the exact same stuff that we saw before. So you have this zombified character getting injected. Yeah. So yeah, why am I not hearing audio? There. Yeah, no clue. But yeah, usually I would be hearing audio. You can see we saw Speedball also June 6th. And that may go to show how little updates happen and how you may have a game announced officially in June, and then in January of the next year you get the next big tease and promotion of it. And Romeo's a Dead Man. I don't think we've seen this stage. Yeah. I feel like this in part is just going to try to be the next Lollipop Chainsaw type game, and it's going to play very much like that. Let's see, Final Fantasy Tactics, The Avalanche Chronicles, shipments and digital sales have topped 1 million. Which, yeah. I was definitely talking about while I was playing Vampire Survivors how the need to sell 1 million copies has become much more thing, whereas 30 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, you could be a small indie company that made a game for 1/10 of the price and expect 1/10 of the profits. But now most Microsofts and EAs and Ubisofts only want to make games that cost a ton of money to sell and make a ton of money. Accountants are lazy, basically, and CEOs are stupid, I guess. And so they don't want to sit through a meeting that lists 20 games all making reasonable profits. They want to sit through a meeting where they talk about one game and that one profit. And that really just goes to show the human nature and single-mindedness of CEOs, basically. Whereas, I guess if we did replace CEOs with AI, they probably would have a much more diverse portfolio of products they're making and selling. Which, yes, I saw someone jokingly make the argument, yeah, management should be replaced by AI before anything else. And they will eventually when it's too late, but there's definitely a case even if management was replaced with AI would then make the exact same decisions to replace all associate level jobs too. Yeah, we can see that this game is rated very positively on Steam. Open forum number 346 in Gamatsu is open, so they've opened up their forum again. Seems like they probably shut down the open forum every now and then when it gets too spicy, and then open it up again, or they shut it down every time their forum software breaks. Or maybe they just cycled around so they have something that they can claim as news. Not really video game news though. Akiba Lost launches September 17th. It's a full-scale live-action game coming to actual consoles. But usually these full motion video style games don't tend to come to consoles. It does increasingly feel like these are Korean games, although this one seems to be Japanese based on the full audio Japanese support. And we may be starting to see a growth in live action content actually being liked in video game form instead of the typical animation only stuff we've seen. Dragon Quest VII Reimagined demo launches January 7th. There's a whole trailer here. I'm not going to bother to even watch it. Hype around Dragon Quest VII Reimagined does seem to be big. And then that brings us to gaming on Linux. The Mesa Red V driver on Linux looks set for a big ray tracing performance boost, going in layers of fear from 75 frames per second to 98 frames per second. Interesting. This would be Radeon's drivers. See the new trailer for an antivirus survivors 2003 professional taking survivor likes to an infested family computer. Yeah, a top-down survivors game now is pretty much off the table, having played Vampire Survivors. I just don't think a reskin, which this feels very much like it would just be a reskin is enough of a reason to go back and play more, put more time into this. If I would want to play a 2D Survivors like that is almost exactly the same as Vampire Survivors, I would do the DLC for Vampire Survivors first. And this is certainly a game that is playing into nostalgia that only older people will actually have. This is a Windows XP 2000 era looking operating system. But yeah, this definitely feels more like a gimmick than an actual game worth playing. And anything that is going to be a Survivors like is going to probably, that I would play, is going to be something closer to Mega Bonk, where there's a 3D element to it, or maybe Bollock's Pit, where the gameplay mechanic changes drastically and it's barely actually a Survivors like. Sprint City from the creators of Speedrunners sounds like a great spiritual successor. Let's see if we watch this trailer. It's actually wiser to not go into full screen mode because there's just text that can be read. Again, I'm not hearing any audio. This is one of those groups of friends speedrunning a level. Yeah, sorry for yawning, but I do think I probably am still in a crash. I'm just gonna be tired today, although so far today I don't feel that tired. There's just different types of tired, and yawning may be more about oxygen intake than anything. I definitely got my blood pressure, according to my cheap $9 smartwatch, up very high, up into the 150s, moving furniture. Yeah, I can definitely feel it when it gets that high, too. Like, after a poor relaunch, Splitgate Arena Reload devs release a statement. Seems like a launch and a relaunch and then a statement is too much, and maybe they should just give up and go home quietly. Overall, we can see that it's mixed reviews as far as Splitgate Arena Reloaded. Although in the last 30 days it's actually mostly positive, so it is doing better now than it has overall. 007 First Light gets its PC specification released, and that's a lot of RAM needed. Minimum of 32 gigabytes of RAM. That's what it's asking for. Yeah. So yeah, this is going to be one of the games this year that is perhaps going to get shunned because it pushes people to have really powerful computers in a time in which people can't afford or even get the components to have a powerful computer. SteamOS 3.7.19 arrives with a bunch of essential bug fixes. Regression with game recording, performance overlay, fixed audio not always switching to and from the 3.5mm headphone jack. Oh, recently I realized that the size of an atom is exactly 1 nanometer, so unless we get into the realm of quantum electronics, there is not much room to go to making electronics smaller. Perhaps there's room to make it more efficient, and most chips are done effectively on a 2D layer, so if we thought in 3 dimensions, there might be a lot more optimization that can happen, but at some point computer components are just going to get bigger, and they'll get really big really fast if all of a sudden we don't have the chips being made in TSMC Taiwan factories. Let's see, game overlay UIs, frame limiter, and something specifically for Forza Horizon 4 and 5. Some more big bug fixes, no big new features. The Lenovo Legion Go 2 will get a SteamOS version in June. So SteamOS is being brought to more hardware things. There is an argument that I might enjoy the ability to detach the controllers, but I don't know if I really want to lose the touchpad or have the touchpad become smaller because of that. Although in fairness, there is still a touchpad, it seems here. There just isn't one here, and I don't know if I've ever really used the left touchpad for much on my Steam Deck. So it is possible that the dual touchpads are just not really needed. Valve has amended the Steam survey for December. Linux actually hit an all-time high. Initially, it was 3.19%. Now it is 3.58%. Yeah. That being said, Valve's hardware survey may not be particularly that accurate. Having a UPS plugged into a regular computer makes Valve's hardware survey sometimes think it's a laptop, simply because it has a uninterruptible power supply plugged into it. Hardware, software wise, it still seems like CachyOS and Bakelite are going up, whereas SteamOS Hollow and Arch Linux in general are going down. So the growth is not really coming from people putting SteamOS on other hardware, which is incredibly difficult to do and get something good out of it, or buying more Steam Decks. KDE Plasma 6.6 will finally stop the system sleeping when gaming with a controller. One of the most annoying issues in your system is going to sleep while gaming with the controller. And KDE Plasma is going to solve that. Let's see. A zoom effect has a mode where the pointer never leaves the center of the physical screen. Emoji Selector app now lets you choose a preferred skin tone for emojis of hands and people. It's now possible to disable timeout indicators on notifications if they stress you out. Doesn't seem like too much is new, but they are coming out with new versions of Plasma pretty quickly, and that's nice. NVIDIA announces Deep Learning Super Sampling 4.5 with dynamic multi-frame generation plus DLSS updater is getting Linux support. I believe Last Tech Tips talked about this one, and the thing, this is probably just going to be a lot talking. The thing with it is it may be getting to the point where instead of creating more frames just to have more frames, it can now dynamically try and just maintain a consistent amount of frames. So you could potentially tell it to just stay at 60 frames per second, or probably closer to 122 frames per second or 144 frames per second, and then it will make more frames when needed, and it will discard the fake frames when not needed. But there is a issue certainly here that it can go up to like 6 fake frames for every 1 real frame that is generating. I think there's also a slight improvement on when it is generating fake frames on identifying the UI elements and not really messing up in those aspects or adding things that shouldn't be there. It's kind of impossible though, looking at a 1080p screen, to really see much of a difference between the two images they're showing here. Yeah, it is 1 rendered frame plus 5 generated frames, which, yeah. And we are unfortunately going to have things like fake frames shoved down our throat. So it will be potentially a case where some people are very sensitive to the fake frames, and a lot of people are just not going to be paying that much attention. The reality is, I think that a lot of people don't care anywhere as much about the graphics as NVIDIA does and pushes it. And so, yeah, it is available today for all RTX GPUs, whereas the dynamic multi-frame gen part is only for the 50 series and isn't out yet. Yeah. But they're showing very high frame rates there, and I just don't think I need 300 frames per second or 200 frames per second, particularly since I'm only going to be recording at 1080p 60. I don't think YouTube has any kind of way in which you could do 1080p at 120 frames or anything like that, where that would make any sense. Speaking not of YouTube but of Twitch, apparently a completely AI run VTuber on Twitch has become the most subscribed to channel on Twitch, which certainly goes to show a major problem with Twitch, in that there aren't a lot of really big streamers that would hold down a AI generated VTuber, and there isn't really an audience there on Twitch that I think cares about the creators enough. And Twitch is pretty much designed so you don't care about the creators. Not that YouTube is designed any better. In fact, YouTube is probably much worse. But it is, I think, yet another nail in the coffin for people who want to be content creators and want to be seen and want to potentially be monetized, not going to Twitch. Because now you're not only competing with the hot tub streamers and the e-girls that were barely making any video game content in the first place, now you're competing with AI generated VTubers. Moving on, the Humble Choice for January has a great overall selection of games. You can see the list here. You may very well see all of these games on Steam. Just Sonic Frontiers, apparently. So AMD revealed the 9850X3D Ryzen AI 400 series and Ryzen AI Max. I think the Ryzen AI 400 series and AI Max are laptop things. So the 9850 is 8 cores, 16 threads, up to 5.6 gigahertz, normally at 4.7 gigahertz, 104 megabytes of total cache with 120 watts TDPU that it's generating and using, which I think I heard was basically 1% better than the 9800. So this really probably is just binning, that they found a slightly better binning process or a slightly better manufacturing process. These AI Maxes combining Zen 5 cores with 8060 series graphics and second generation XDNA neural processing units. The assumption here is this is going to be built-in stuff, and with that you have 12 cores and 24 threads at a slower speed, less cache, and a varying TDPU for mobile. That being said, I'm not sure you're going to get great battery life anyways for these top of the end processors. Now I'll say Intel in particular doesn't really have anything that they announced as far as I recall. So Intel is not really caring about gaming and not really doing much of anything at the moment. Although in fairness, Intel, being an Israeli company, would probably not be particularly well received, so their best thing to do is just stay silent and work in the background. Although, with the current state of politics, I think people may have begun to forget about whether or not they were for or against Israel, for a while at least. NVIDIA has announced a native Linux app for GeForce Now. NVIDIA already added Steam Deck support for GeForce Now, and now they're expanding it with a dedicated native Linux app for desktops, truly beginning to show how far things have come for Linux gaming, as everyone is now truly taking notice. A little editorialization there. It's going to support Ubuntu, and seemingly that's it. Okay. So if you have Ubuntu 24.04 or later, you can install this native app and stream games from GeForce Now, which is nice, I suppose. The Legion Go with Bakelite is an excellent machine for gaming. Apparently the editor just acquired one. I would still say, though, that there is not really a great argument to buying anything other than a Steam Deck. Yeah. But I don't know. Yeah, I just don't think you're going to be guaranteed that level of long-term support that the Steam Deck will give you, or the larger community. Images are not loading for some reason. Intel did announce something. I didn't hear about it. They launched a Core Ultra Series 3 at CES with Arc B390, teases new handheld gaming platform. So, yeah. It would be really surprising, though, if Intel could do something to convince me that recommend having an Intel CPU. Sorry, I'm yawning again. Again, I think I probably will just fall asleep after the stream ends, and that will be it for me for today, and I'll probably wake up in the middle of the night and start doing something. My sleep schedule is still really crazy. Ubisoft closes its Halifax studios weeks after the workers vote to unionize. Yeah, that literally cannot be a coincidence. Shape of Dreams has topped 1 million in sales. It's an indie roguelite reaching a milestone in around 4 months. Yeah. I would say in general, your chance of what am I trying to say here? I'm really getting sleepy. Well, I think I lost that train of thought completely. There's a report here that Discord confidentially filed for an IPO. That does seem believable and reliable to understand, to be a thing. Hopefully, and that's basically all we can do, is hope it doesn't immediately lead to Discord being garbage. I put a lot of hope and thought into my Discord being something. It can go the long haul. Well, who knows? GameDeveloper.com has an obituary for the Sega co-founder David Ryzen, passing away at the age of 95. David Ryzen's Ryzen Enterprises merged with Nihon Koraku Busen to create Sega Enterprises in 1965. So that's how he did it. I don't know who this person is, but might be a Nihon Koraku Busan's CEO. It might be his wife. Yeah. There's some more information here if you want to read the whole story. I'm not going to go over it because I'm falling asleep quickly here. Former Naughty Dog co-president to be inducted in the AIAS Hall of Fame. I guess that's the DICE Awards. This is interesting to have a photo with such a big frame around it. You don't see that very often. Then we talked about Final Fantasy Tactics, the Avalanche Chronicles selling 1 million units. And then Microsoft has turned to some Hisense smart TVs into an Xbox. This is funny, the image is not getting shrunk down. Well, that may just be the image. Yeah. That'd be a weird crop if that's the image. Gonna have to investigate this page later. If I ever do get back to fixing the way pages look. VR Studio Cloudhead Games cuts 70% of its workforce. I could see this being a year in which we see a lot of layoffs as far as games that VR companies start laying off people. And know what I said just didn't make any sense. Alright, we're going through all the new games, and I'm going to, on Steam, and I'm going to try and rush through them fairly quickly. If I'm swiping down, that means I am closing the game. If I'm putting them on the follow list, that means I'm interested in them, and if I'm swiping to the right, then I am leaving it open to make a YouTube short on it, or at least pretend like I'm going to make a YouTube short on it. Really haven't done that in a while. Yeah. I saw an interesting video on how to make a auto dungeon generator in Godot. Just a basic tutorial, really, which ironically is something that I was talking about to someone on another Discord, and I thought about posting the video, but I felt like that would be harping on the issue since it had been several days since that post had happened, and I felt like I needed to probably go pretty soft in my comments there, because someone had suggested using, I think it's mazegenerator.com, and while that is a fine website to make a picture of a maze, it is not really very helpful as far as making a video game with a dungeon slash maze. Most people don't want dungeons that are actually like a labyrinth type maze where it's a big square and there's a whole bunch of different dead ends and things like that. Most dungeons have a lot of empty space and more thought out paths. So even like the Godot example really is more of an example of a starting point where you would want to put an artistic hand and touch to it to put some more logic into it. That is one of the criticisms of things like Vampire Survivors, which this looks very much like Vampire Survivors in some ways. But yeah, most of the levels are flat, open plains, and you can just move in any direction. And unless you know how to unlock a secret, there's nothing different that's going to happen by moving in any direction. You're just going to see a slightly different random assortment of repeating tiles. And they're not really random, in fact, they're pretty uniform. What's funny is usually when I'm falling asleep, I'm feeling like I'm a little bit too generous. But today I feel like I'm still maintaining at least a decent level of curation of things I want to make YouTube shots on, or YouTube videos, YouTube shorts on them. It always surprises me when watching these Godot tutorials, though, just how much built-in functions you can rely on, and how these scripts are just not things that turn into 500 lines of code in the tutorial aspects, I imagine. As soon as you start to get into the real process of making something very big, you do start to see scripts that get a lot larger. And there is an issue, certainly, in that we have yet to see a huge game being made in Godot. Where we still are very much seeing a lot more people making 2D games. And nobody really has come out with a huge 3D game in the Godot engine yet. But give it a couple of years and that probably will happen. Once I get this computer desk built, my plan is to stack some folding tables on top of the computer desk to get even more height, and then move a bunch of boxes on it. And so it's right now I'm looking at the room and it's nice and empty and almost move-in ready, and I know that I fairly quickly am going to make it a lot worse. I think we may have a problem here in that some of these games are not on the follow list or not getting added to the follow list. Now I guess it's just a one page out of problem. I wonder how hard it would really be to make a Diablo-like game in Godot. Because that's exactly what I would want. Diablo 2, dark, realistic graphics taken to a new scale. Obviously it couldn't be called Diablo, but just something where you were fighting a bunch of dungeons and procedurally generated dungeons, and you were getting items that had stats on it, and it just didn't have the seasonality aspect that Diablo 4 has, nor does it have the online elements and marketplace elements that Diablo 4 has. And I don't know if a single or small group of people could make a game like that. You'd almost have to start by only having 4 characters at most that you could play as. You might find that the visuals aren't going to really match up compared to like mobile games and other games that are already available. They'll all just play a little bit differently. And it's not like you're telling a new and original story there. So probably would be something that if I was just in a computer class making computer projects, I would try to recreate Diablo with a map generator, and that would be the hardest thing. And then I would only get to basically the level of making a vertical slice before I would really have to admit defeat and have people come in and make new characters. And I would have personally a desire to make kind of an open source thought, so I could see how possibly could push for open source mods of characters and having other people create the characters and the weapons, and the main game just focusing on stories, a main story, but like more enemy types, much like how Doom is way much more of a big game when you consider all the Doom mods compared to just playing the first episode of Doom, which is what most people did. And I don't think there makes any real sense to do any flawless cleanup today, as I'm falling asleep again. And I really don't know how to correct when I am sleeping like this, because I mean, I really slept in, and sleeping in makes it worse more than it helps half the time. So I could have potentially woken up at 3 in the morning and done the stream then. Anyways, that's going to be it for the stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and keep on watching. Thanks.